Friends, this is Father Richard Erikson. I have the great privilege of serving as a priest of the Archdiocese of Boston and as a reserve chaplain in the United States Air Force. In the 15th chapter of the Gospel of John, we hear Jesus telling us, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Every person who's ever served in the military has been willing to do this, to lay down her life, his life. In this series, No Greater Love, we're considering the life and the example of a few men and women who have served God and country in the military with spiritual fortitude and with courage. One cannot share the highlights of service to country without mentioning the extraordinary service and sacrifice of women. Today we honor one such woman, Saint Joan of Arc. In the United States, she's most familiar as the Maid of New Orleans. Charles VII of France appointed Joan as the commander of his national army at the age of 17. She's the youngest person recorded to have commanded a national army. Seeking diplomatic alternatives to armed conflict was one of Joan's passions, and this approach is closely aligned with the teachings of the Church. From the Archdiocese for the Military Services, we learn, quote, "For many centuries, the Church's teaching on peace and war has shaped by the just war theory. Just war theory is the philosophical doctrine which states that war should be avoided at all costs, but the correct conditions are present, then a war can be justified." The two pioneers of this theory were St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, end quote. Joan embodied this theory with tireless devotion as she proposed alternative solutions to the battlefield. Joan is often portrayed with a banner, a battle banner, with the words Jesus, Mary, and the three saints to whom she was devoted, St. Catherine, St. Margaret, and St. Michael. While she was a great strategist and commander of the French army, she wasn't an active combatant in the 100 Years' War. Joan's logistical and tactical skills made her an invaluable asset to the troops which she inspired and led. And even though she wasn't an active combatant, she was injured twice. In the Battle of Orleans, she suffered a shoulder wound from an arrow and a thigh wound from a crossbow during the Liberation Battle. Interestingly, while we still retell the stories of Joan's military service, she served for just 1 year in the military before she was imprisoned. Joan's upbringing was devoutly Catholic, and she believed that her service to France was a calling from God. She would celebrate Mass with her troops as often as she could, requesting special hymns at the Masses for the troops so that they could reflect on their service in the light of God's will. Joan worked hard to discern God's will for her and was willing to risk ridicule for her piety. She faced down royalty with strategies to free France, and she practiced tirelessly her faith. She was burned at the stake as a teenager for the way she lived her faith. These authentic attributes are what makes Joan's sainthood so inspiring to us in the 21st century. She had no greater love than for God. We join Joan of Arc in praying for the courage to follow God's will and working for peace in our world.